So we have local elections going on in our neck of the woods. My particular city is Duncanville. The positions are City Council Member at Large, City Council Districts 1, 3, and 5. The only problem is that they're all Democrats. Now, obviously, for the Democrats in the area, they have plenty to choose from, but the Conservatives are coming at it from one of two attitudes. One, there's no Democrats and there's no point in voting. Or two, they're all Democrats, so what's the point in voting? Because my voice isn't going to be heard. Here's the problem with that. Let's say, even though it's going to be liberals and Democrats are going to go out to vote for these city members, and that's only like 30 to 40% of the people in a specific area who are liberal, what's to say that 60% of those liberals aren't going to pick someone who's from the far left? That means that if we want to make sure that whoever gets into office is not too far off center uh, for the rest of us, and whether or not they're a Democrat, we need to make sure they're moderate enough not to make any radical changes to Duncanville. That means that conservatives have an invested interest in making sure they vote in a moderate Democrat who's centrist enough not to mess up the way Duncanville is working as it is. So, the candidates in this area, we had Patrick Harvey and Angela. Is that the way the website is working? It's kind of difficult to say the names. Angela D. Jones, Richard E. Shaw, and Sean Van Laufer. Well, I'll get out the one out of the way that I thought, not saying she's bad as much as her policy seems a bit odd. Okay. Okay, since my face is covering up a lot of it, I'll just point out the fact that um, she's emphasizing the use of, well, here, my priorities are summed up by the acronym HUGS. Basically, that stands for Homestead Exemptions, Uniting All Districts, Grow Small Business Economy, and Gain Employer Partnerships, and Stay in Duncanville. Now, that's an interesting idea, but looking at the entirety of the questionnaires, it does not specify, well, she doesn't specify what she thinks needs to be done. She's just specifying how she'd like to go about figuring out what needs to be done. Now, compare that with Patrick Harvey. He at least has a good idea about where he thinks changes need to be done. Particularly with the effect of the pandemic and the freeze Texas had. Let's see. Our budget shrinkage appears to be under 10%. I think we can absorb with a long-term adjustment in programs. Let's see here. Given the fact that no business closed locally, I believe there will not be any additional budget impacts. Let's see, raising the tax. I would look to service cuts first, starting in administrative initiatives, exempting police and fire. Now, right off the bat, it appears that looking at the way the economy is, he does not see a need to change all that much. Looking at Sean, we have a similar situation going on. Our city is currently running with a balanced budget, so I don't expect long-term budget impacts from either of these issues. Due to a limited service industry here, such as restaurants, that took such a big hit during the most restrictive portion of the pandemic, I think our city budget wasn't hit as hard as other communities. I don't believe budget cuts in services will be necessary, nor raising taxes to cover these issues. If one or the other was required, I would consult with my constituents to gauge their desires before making a decision. I think other cuts would be made before raising taxes or other cutting services. So, even though they might be, even though they might be Democrats, more importantly, is whether or not they would have an effect on the local. They would make changes to the local economy due to what they see as necessary changes. Um, Not too much to say there. As such, having a candidate who, observing the local economy, does not see a need to change Duckville anyway, would be very rewarding to people of the conservative interest. As such, that's why I put an emphasis on the fact that even though all the candidates for a certain role are going to be Democrats, don't think that that limits what conservatives can get out of a certain situation. At this point, the most important thing between these two is this one thing down here. In regards to the city's greatest challenge and opportunity in the next several years, Patrick has suggested the need for redevelopment, as in fixing up their currently aging buildings and developing on undeveloped land to create opportunities. Sean, on the other hand, instead of trying to develop the land currently available, he suggests creating incentives for businesses to come in to increase the tax revenue, by which that can allow for better development of our city. So in this case, it would seem that Sean has more of an incentive to vote for him than Patrick does. Does that mean that he is the best candidate? Well, some might think that it's not more businesses that need to come in as much as we need to get our current buildings repaired and such, so as to encourage city growth. But that's just my opinion. So that's why I cannot begin to emphasize voting on the right Democrat is just as important as voting on the right Republican. This is something that I cannot begin to emphasize how important it is, especially considering what's going on in all these other cities like Portland, Chicago, Minneapolis, New York. If we want to make sure we don't turn into any of those states, we need to make sure that the right Democrats get selected.